So having set the scene with the kind of background information for the company and some of the components that go into the products it manufactures, Seema now takes us back to commercial considerations as we look at the sales pattern for the year for Mavis Venderby. And what we notice here is that it's quite a cyclical business. This is a business that has a short period of intensity and a busy period. And then for 7 months of the year, they're really not generating a lot in the way of sales. What we see is from March through to July, they have 70% of their sales, okay? Which begs the question, what are they doing the rest of the year? They have a 5-month period, or sorry, a 7-month period where just 30% of the sales are being made. Is there something else they could be doing during those 7 months to generate more revenue? And I think that's going to be a key consideration for Mavis Venderby as they go forward. So we're told that the peak honey production time for Tuckland is this 5-month period between March and July. So from late spring through the summer. And sales are usually at their highest, in fact, in the very first 2 months of this 5-month period in March and April. So it's a cyclical industry, and we have to start thinking about what the rate of production is. How is Mavis Venderby handling its production? Is it maintaining a steady rate of output throughout the year, or is it in fact forecasting demand accurately and altering its production to account for the peaks and falls in demand? We don't know that yet. If in fact it's producing its beehives steadily throughout the year with the same amount produced in each month, then they're going to have issues with inventory management. Most likely they'll have inventory building up and sitting idle for long periods of time, which is costly and inefficient. We still don't know that. We'll see that in a few pages' time. So the 7 months of low sales, really, I think they need to start thinking about diversifying into other areas. We've already mentioned the possibility of rearing queen bees, for example, but there are other things they can do which we'll talk about a little bit later on. And another question I would ask at this point is, have they got fixed staff, or do they have part-time workers, or some combination of the two? If in fact they want to bring in more staff at their peak period, that would mean bringing in some part-time workers. Is there then a danger that the quality of their output would fall, that it would suffer if they have those kind of flexible workers? So moving on. Now we come to the production process itself. There are 3 key steps in this production process. There's the drying step, then we have cutting, and finally the packing. Interestingly, right at the start, one of our questions from the previous page is answered. We were asking the question whether Mavis Venderby would produce their beehives evenly throughout the year, or whether they would tailor their output to correspond to the peaks and falls in demand. And what we see here is, in fact, they are producing evenly throughout the year. And because the sales are seasonal, we have an issue with inventory. Okay, the inventory levels are varying throughout the year. And that's costly. And as I said before, it's inefficient. They're likely then to have issues with inventory management and with the inventories figure we will see in the balance sheet. And in fact, they do. But we'll see that more closely when we come to the financials of this company. Okay, moving then to the 3 stages of beehive production, which we see below. Let's start with the drying step. Drying. we're told that the wood is dried on site prior to being used in production. And there's a combination of air drying and the use of this drying kiln. Okay, it's used for both the types of wood that Mavis Venderby uses, which is pine and cedar, as you'll remember. Usually cedar is dried for 6 months, which is interesting, while pine is dried for 4 months. So here we can start to see the reasons for opting for pine as an alternative to cedar. That cedar, while it's higher quality, less problematic to work with, takes in fact 2 months more to dry than pine, which is additional cost, of course, for Mavis Venderby. Each type of wood is purchased in 3-meter planks and stacked upon receipt. So initially the wood is left to air dry, and then the planks of wood are rotated on a regular basis. So this is quite a manual process, I imagine, and it takes up quite some time. Right at the start, what I'm seeing here is that we have a bottleneck, okay? And I would ask the question whether it's better for Mavis Venderby to consider buying in already dried wood. We're talking about long lead times, so the time from ordering the raw material to the sale of the final product is going to be really long. And it's this very first step, the drying process, that is adding a lot of time to this process. And it further complicates the issue of managing inventory well. So we already have a very seasonal industry in which production is being kept even throughout the year by Mavis Venderby. But you have these raw materials sitting around for 4 to 6 months. It's not helping at all. And it also helps to explain why cedar is being sold for more. You'll remember both the box hives and the slatted hives, in the cedar variety, the sales price was higher. Okay, it's costing more for Mavis Venderby to produce cedar hives. Of course, those costs are going to be passed on in some form to the customer, so the retail price is that bit higher. Let's move down to the cutting process. So this is the second stage in the production process. And what we see here is that you have more skilled workers getting involved at this stage, because we're talking about the use of programmable machinery being used to cut both the box and slatted hives. Each one requires a slightly different cutting program. So we've got a setup, the setup time required there. Some of the components also, the stand and the roof, are being assembled by hand, and all of the components are sanded and quality checked here. And we're told here that there are knots in the pine that are sealed at this point. So here we start to see that pine is a lower quality wood, more likely to be slightly defective, and this point is reinforced when we're told that cedar is easier to work with than the pine, and there are fewer imperfections in that wood. So there's a cost here associated with pine in that there's a higher wastage than there is with cedar in this cutting process. So I would ask whether it's worth considering just working with cedar. So you would further simplify your operations if you're just dealing with one type of wood. So something for Mavis Venderby to consider there. And then the final step in the process is the packing stage. So it's after the quality checks have been performed, all of the components for the hive are shrink wrapped for protection, and they're placed in the finished goods storage area. Okay, so these finished goods, again, if the production is held even throughout the year, you're going to have finished goods stacking up, and that's going to represent the cost for the company.